when we show up as our most authentic self and run the risk of vulnerability, I actually get to know you. Welcome to The King Within, a podcast for men who seem to have it all, yet feel like they're losing what matters most. I'm Mike Salemi and I've been there. Successful on paper but disconnected on the inside. This isn't about grinding harder. It's about mastering your emotions, leading with calm strength, and rebuilding trust at home. Each week we dive into real stories and tools for becoming the man your family runs towards, not away from. Because you didn't build this life to lose yourself in it. This is The King Within. Let's do the work. Welcome to the show. I'm here with Harry Duran, who is now a close friend of mine and also my new podcast producer. In today's episode, we're going to go into really describing, unpacking the evolution of the podcast. It was originally The Path with Mike Salemi, and now it is the King Within podcast, something that I am so excited about. So Harry's going to be interviewing me. We're going to dive into why the change, where we're going, and I cannot wait to dive in with you, brother.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's wild to think that we've only known each other maybe, what's it now, 4 weeks, and it's been a whirlwind. And shout out to our mutual friend, Christina Wise, who we met and connected with at the Longevity web session or conference in Park City, Utah. And I was honored to have met you there and Lauren, and you took us through some great embodiment and breath work to start the day. And it was a great reminder of how important it is to be in touch with that part of yourself, and especially as an entrepreneur. And then as we got to talking, I started to learn about your podcast. And then eventually we had a follow-up after the conference. And then you had your Men of Movement coming up, and couldn't have been more well-timed. My birthday was on October 10th. And I think we were talking a week before that, and I was like, well, this seems like not a bad way to spend my birthday. So after seeing, what you were going to be covering there at Mount Shasta, I attended that event, which was a transformational 3.5 days. And thank you again for leading us through that wonderful experience, my first ever sweat lodge. So, lots that we can talk about in terms of that deep dive. But I thought what would be great here is to get a better understanding of, your journey on the podcast. And as you mentioned, people that are listening or been watching you for a while, know you and the show as The Path. And I guess what I want to start with is your intention when you first started the podcast, and what were you hoping to accomplish, and maybe talk us through that first phase.
So this is pre-COVID, but before COVID, there was a few years where I was on the road approximately 6 months of the year, traveling, teaching, anything and everything movement related. And in that way, especially since for many years, like I've been able to be in contact with just some amazing people in the health, fitness, and movement space. A lot of great teachers, a lot of great mentors. And so it was always suggested to me like, man, you're always around these people. You've got great connections. You're a likable guy. Why don't you do a podcast? And I had been a guest on a number of different shows. And so I was familiar with what it was like to be interviewed. I really did enjoy it. I love, at my core, the archetype that I deeply resonate with is the teacher. I love teaching. I love sharing. I love learning. And so it was a natural fit, but I had so many limiting beliefs around starting my own podcast. And it took me about 5 years, more or less, to actually develop the courage and to work through all the limiting beliefs, like, ain't no one going to listen. You're going to suck. It's not going to be good. All of the things, the stories you can't even imagine. I wrote a whole list of every reason why I should not have a podcast. And then right around more or less the birth of my son, Luca, that was a major moment of, let's just say, confrontation with parts of myself where I just knew I could either keep going down the same path that I was, being just completely sidelined or felt like my feet were in cement blocks of the aspirations that I had. And then as he was coming, I was like, oh man, I really need to look at some of these stories, and they're sneaky and they're hidden. And so him coming, it was such a call forward and a call up of how do I want to be as a father, as an embodied man? How do I want to show up? What do I want? What type of legacy do I want to lead? Do I want him to remember me, or do I want to think of myself as the father who was paralyzed by fear, or the father that was afraid and actually took the next step? So I decided to start the path, and that was really when I started it. I got so many interest, and I know you're like that too. I got so many
Yeah.
interests on wealth and spirituality and masculinity and performance. And so the podcast was great and I enjoyed it thoroughly. However, it was spread so vast. And what I found is the conversations were great and some of them were just super heartwarming and touching. But what I was finding, because truthfully, yeah, my intention is to share value and to teach, but also, this is also how I provide for my family. As I was going down the path, I was like, man, I was investing a lot of money. Conservatively, I've spent over 50 grand in the last 3-ish years of having the podcast on
Mm,
production, on all this stuff. And so I
yeah.
was really figuring out if I'm going to make this thing a long-term play, which I want to, I really got to figure out and really get even more specific around the man and the type of person that I want to help. You'll hear it all the time. Like if you try to serve everybody, you'll serve nobody.
Yeah.
And even all the interests and the things I've dove into, I was like, man, I really need to get more focused on who do I really want to serve and how do I want to serve them. And so the goal always is to provide value, to show up, to share, to support, but then also have this be a real thing that could, show and share with people who are interested in going deeper about the retreat or about the Grounded King men's group, to really give them the insight and a taste of what that is and then to get value from it. So even if they didn't join, it would still be all in alignment. So alignment, providing for the family, getting more focus with my energy and who I'm serving out there. Those were all, entrances into where we're at right now.
So that's wonderful because it tells a lot about what your intentions were when you started the show and how that's evolved. And like you said, you have so many different interests and probably that's what you were trying to cover with the first iteration, the path, like the path that you're on in your life. Why now in terms of like the rebrand? What's coming alive for you now in your life, in your work, where you feel like now more having to be intentional with the message?
One of the things with the path, one of the reasons why I loved that brand and that name for so long is I always felt that, and I'm speaking of myself and then also with clients, so many of us are living lives according to what other people think we're supposed to be or who we're supposed to be. And so the path was really a call to myself and reflected my own journey. I've been a strength and conditioning coach most all of my life. The men's work has been in the last 7-ish years, more or less. But I also worked for my family business in the marble and granite industry for 8
Mm,
years. And so Sicilian family, both mom and dad are immigrants. There's, in any family dynamic and in any family business, there's a lot of expectations. And so even though I'm grateful for that opportunity and what it provided for me, and it funded a lot of the coaches I got to work with, it was not what I was meant here to do.
mm.
And so the path was all about the path that you choose to follow. The only path that's right for you is the one that you're walking yourself. And it's really was a call forward for people to clarify, what's your path? Stop looking outside of yourself. Figure out what it is that you really want. And literally, what's the hill that you would die on? And to own that and to follow that path. And so that was a part of my journey. And then, with this podcast, The King Within, it's also reflective of my journey as well, because part of what I'm really inspired, and you got to experience this at the retreat,
Yeah.
but the tagline for the retreat is lead from the middle.
Yeah.
Now, everyone has their own style of leadership, and I'll, respect how everyone wants to do their own thing. But for me, what has felt historically most authentic and most natural is when I feel into the type of leader that I am and strive to be, it's in the middle, meaning there's going to be a time and a place where I've got to be at the front and leading and taking that stand and be in the front lines. But then there's also a time to step back and let other people lead, whether it's participants or facilitators. And then also leading from the middle is being with the men. That's why
Yeah.
myself and the other facilitators, we go through everything with you. Like we're not out of the sweat lodge. Like I'm right there dying next to you. So the lead from the middle, it was really with the path specifically, and how that relates is I really want to share what I'm learning as I'm learning it. As a
Mm,
father, as a
yeah.
man, going through my own struggles, like there's no hierarchy in this stuff. Like, no. And so with the King Within, as you know, I've got a family now, you met Lauren and Luca,
Yeah.
like I'm stepping into my own version of what a king is to me. And for me, it's yes, it's what we create externally, but it's the leadership, the inner knowing, it's the responsibility, it's the presence of how we move through life. And so this podcast is also my reminder to cultivate that king within, and everything else that's manifested or created or cultivated outside of me or outside of you or outside of you as you're listening is truly a reflection of the work that you're doing internally.
That's really powerful. This word king comes sort of laden with a lot of preconceived notions about what it means, and people probably associate it with like the tyrant king. What does your redefinition of that word mean, and how should
Mm.
listeners and viewers, interpret that as it relates to this show and what you plan going forward?
Yeah, I love that question because I was talking to both my mom and my st- uh my mother-in-law about this, and both of them like took a step back, like calling it the king. And I get where they're coming from with that because
Yeah,
historically, yeah, there's been a lot of tyrant kings, and
yeah,
it's been, yeah, historically it hasn't been great. And there's also been incredible kings, generative kings, caring kings, thoughtful kings. This is the identity that I'm calling forward, yes, is the king within, but it's also the grounded king,
hmm,
a king that has inner sovereignty, that
mm,
knows his hell yeses, that knows his hell no's, that acts with greater clarity and decisive action, that is not a dominator, that is not controlling by force, that is actually leading by example. It's not a push, it's a pull. And so it's a call to maturity, it's a call to taking responsibility for the life that we're creating. You know, one of my mentors, Paul Chek, I thought he had a brilliant definition of spirituality, and it was the spiritual man is the man who takes responsibility for what he's creating moment to moment.
love
I was
that.
like, man, that's super grounded. I can get behind that.
Yeah.
So, the grounded king or the king within, the name of this podcast is someone who's rooted in their core values, not necessarily the values that they inherited from their parents. Nothing against our parents, but most men specifically, and most people in this world, are regurgitating a script that they inherited from father to son, great grandfather, grandfather,
Yeah.
etc. And so this is also, how can we cultivate these things inside of us to know what is our values, that maybe some of them we want to carry on that work for us. But my work with my son, like his work will pick up where mine leaves off.
Mm,
And so the king within is really a call to maturity, a call to responsibility, really solid leadership. And it's different than what most people would associate with the king. That's really what I'm doing my best to have this podcast stand for.
yeah. Thanks for that explanation and just outlining the difference between the way people have typically perceived that word. Talk a little bit about the men's movement and men's work in general. That was my third retreat that I had been on, and they've all been powerfully transformative. But it feels like this is needed now more than ever, like this type of
Mm.
work. And obviously, we could probably have another long episode, a couple 2 hours just on this topic, and it's going to be an underlying theme, I'm sure, of a lot of the future episodes. But just maybe a short version of, why this is important work to do now.
Man. I mean, men's work as a whole, like that's men's work in general could mean something different to any given person or any given man.
Yeah.
And every single, just like my brand or the tagline of lead from the middle, that's very reflective of what's authentic to me. So there is some great men's work going on out there. So I'll give a bit of landscape of that, but then also the call of why this is needed today. So, I mean, it really depends on the environment that we grew up in. I'm going to speak in extremes just to paint a picture. And someone listening, you listening, you may fall anywhere on this extreme, or you may relate to some of this, or you may not. But many men that I've coached and come into contact with were never modeled vulnerability. And if they were, I mean, a lot of guys grew up with toughen up, suck it up, don't cry. Vulnerability is weakness. And I
Yeah.
actually believe it's the opposite. Like vulnerability actually is courage. Like vulnerability, when I'm looking at someone that I would trust and follow, that's why in a short amount of time when you were at the retreat, why now you've really become a close friend. It's when we show up as our most authentic self and run the risk of vulnerability, I actually get to know you. Less about the mask that you wear or who you think you need to be to show up. I mean, that's one of the greatest reflections we've gotten from the retreat is guys come in with who they think they're supposed to be, and they walk out with a much deeper, visceral, embodied understanding of who they are. And in a short amount of time, I really get to know you, you get to know me. And so with vulnerability, I see it as a superpower, right? But also there's an extreme of pure vulnerability. What'll end up happening is you'll get a guy who doesn't have a spine. Like they don't like it's not about being vulnerable at all times in all situations with everybody and everybody, but we also need to have a spine. So we need to have something that actually holds that. And then on the other end of, just say on the extreme of men's work, you have the men's work that like goes through extreme physical tests and physical pain and physical rites of passage to access that deeper state of knowing. And in that regard, what I tend to see is guys that are just broken down, beat to
Mm,
shit, that the story of I'm not a man unless I kill myself and beat myself down, and I got to earn respect in that way. And I think there's value in both extremes, but I do think the art and the nuance of it is understanding how, when, why, how can we balance these energies? How can we have a spine and be strong, powerful, physical leaders of ourselves and our family and protect and provide? But then also, can we bring a connection to our hearts so that when we walk through the door, your son or daughter or your wife feels actually safe around you?
yeah.
So that's what I'm seeing, on the extremes. And now there's people like, John Wineland or Connor Beaton. Like there's some great leaders out there that have been teachers of mine, whether they're from afar or up close. My mentor, Ted Ryder, that I would say has a really balanced approach that teaches the cultivation of our own masculine, which is not a gender thing, and our own feminine. So the balance of how the masculine in general and zooming out, the masculine being integrity, structure, awareness, the center point, it's stillness, it's what holds. The feminine energetically is anything associated with feeling, sensing, emoting, anything with movement. So, a balanced approach that really teaches men how to have integrity, integrity of their word, of their heart, of their purpose, of their body, but also men that are connected to their hearts and know how to communicate and share what they're really feeling. That's where I'm seeing the greatest call towards men moving forward is those pieces right there, the balance and the integration of both of those.
Yeah, that's great. And that just speaks to what the underlying energy and theme is going to be for this show going forward. And I
Mm.
think that's a lot of what we talked about. So, what can listeners and viewers expect? What are you cooking up in terms of like interviews and what's your vision?
Oh man, I'm so excited about this. It's just going to be more tip of the spear, like tip of the spear on very specific guests, topics, interviews that my personal lens that have helped me the most. These are all things that I practice or I'm studying or results and work that clients are doing in the retreats, in the Grounded Man group, in one-on-one coaching. So it's all learning by experience. And what can you expect? So, I mean, all the topics that we just mentioned. So, how to show up as a more loving, grounded, steady father, husband, learning how to stay calm even in the midst of chaos. I mean, that's one of the most essential skills that we can cultivate as men, even with everything going on around us, even with the greatest challenges, when every part of our brain is telling us, don't approach that challenging conversation with your wife. Don't share that, or, put on the tough guy, the nice guy, people please everybody. It's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
like we're here to call for something greater. And so I'm going to be talking about topics that sharpen men, that call them forward, authors that I'm really excited to learn from, rites of passage, and it's going to be hyper focused on helping men cultivate their king within. And I would say if I were to condense it down to 2 words, what feels most true for me in this moment is responsibility and presence.
Mm.
Like, to be a man who takes responsibility for the life he's creating, and then to approach life with a greater level of presence. Because especially as a father, I've talked about this before, I think on other shows, but I'm realizing that presence is the currency of fatherhood. Like, he
Mm.
doesn't care how much money I'm making. He doesn't care. All he wants is Papa to go to the park, Papa play with me, Papa be with me. And so this will be for the men who feel disconnected from their wives, who are struggling with their kids, who don't know how to stay calm even amidst the chaos, and who truly want to be proud of themselves. And so I'm going to teach and interview people on those topics, really have it be experiential. And as I said just a moment ago, like my dream for myself and my dream for anybody listening is that you're truly proud of the man that you are because of how you're showing up. That would be my dream for anybody listening.
Yeah, and if any of what you said resonates with anyone listening or watching, you need to send this episode to that person, or make sure you subscribe yourself or someone you know that needs to hear this message, because I think that's one of the most important things we can do when we find content that resonates. I've done it in the past, send it to some of my friends and saying, you got to listen to this. Like, and if it's strong enough and it's potent enough, they're usually like, thank you for sending that. And I think we owe it as men to sort of help each other when we find content that resonates. And I think a lot of what we're going to be sharing in future episodes is going to be just that flavor of content. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to cover. I mean, I know we can do a deeper dive at some point in a future episode. I'm sure there's a lot. As a podcast host myself, I'd love to unpack about your journey, but we'll table that one. And I just wanted to let folks know that we'll be releasing, sounds like we're going to be releasing episodes weekly now, cadence, and typically Thursdays we'll be dropping them. So the URL, easy to remember URL, we've got the King Within podcast, and that'll take you to your favorite podcast player. So you can watch. We're bringing back or introducing the video as a component, which I think is going to be a very powerful component as well. So people can get that visual of you having these in-person conversations with some powerful folks. So any closing thoughts, Mike, about how you're feeling about the direction we're headed in?
I mean, I'm just so excited, man. I'm so grateful that we ran into each other at that event. And again, we've gotten to know each other so much more closely over these weeks. I'm super excited for the direction. And I think I'll close by saying, I mean, that event really showed me a lot. And it was arguably the first time that I had been around a room of really high achievers
Mm,
that also lived from an abundance mindset.
yeah.
And I mean, that's how we connected. Like, you're willing, like, if I would have just taken the suggestions that you gave me out of the goodness of your heart when we were talking multiple times,
Yeah.
I could have done tons more stuff with the podcast. We really hit it off. We jived, and then I got to know you more at the retreat, obviously. And so that experience really also showed me another reason for the direction of this podcast, which, so many men focus on external success and kicking ass and
Mm,
achieving, and yet they feel empty. They don't know how to celebrate themselves. They don't know how to celebrate joy. And so
yeah.
in part, that's another thing I'm really excited about, is to how can we be successful, be badasses, provide, protect, all of
Yeah.
that, but also have our family come along with us,
Yeah.
as opposed to being successful on paper and then compensating or coping with porn and alcohol and all of these things. It's like, no, like that's what that event showed me. And I'm so grateful that we connected. Thank you so much for being here with me and doing this conversation. I'm Yeah, I'm lit up, and I can't wait to get firing with more episodes.
All right. Looking forward to the journey. And if you're watching or listening, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you're subscribing. And if you're listening on Spotify and Apple, as the podcast producer, it's my responsibility to get you to follow. All right. More to come.